So in our last video, we talked about expansionary fiscal policy. Now we're going to talk about contractionary fiscal policy. So that means either we have less government spending, or it could mean higher taxes, or both. So it has the same effect either way, whether it's lower spending or higher taxes. If there's lower government spending, that means there's less overall spending in the economy. So it's going to shift AD back. Similarly, if you have higher taxes, that means people have less money, and people have less money, they're going to spend less. So while the graphs look similar, we will see in the next section that taxes and spending have somewhat different effects in the magnitudes. So they both cause AD to shift back, but one will cause AD to shift back more than the other one does. Now, the motivation for why you'd ever use contractionary fiscal policy is designed to reduce the deficit. So if you're looking at the deficit, and if you're alarmed about that, and whether you should be alarmed, we'll talk about that in the last part of the chapter. If you want to do something about that, contractionary fiscal policy would be your tool. That's because if you have more taxes, it means more tax revenue and less expenditures, so that would tend to reduce the deficit. So that's what does the AD curve in isolation, but we care about what it does in the full ASAD model. So let's look at the effect with the other curves in there as well. So as always, we start from long run equilibrium unless the problem tells us not to. And then we said that contractionary fiscal policy causes AD to shift back. So now we're going to be over here. So new price will be P1. And as always, this does not get a star because it's not a long run equilibrium. GDP is going to be Y1. And because we are below our LRS curve, unemployment is going to be above the natural rate. So our short run effects are you have lower prices and you also have lower GDP and you get higher unemployment. So as you can see, while you are fighting a deficit by getting more revenue and less spending, it might also give you a recession. So those are the short run effects. In the long run, we note that because prices fell in the short run, firms are going to negotiate for lower wages. So if everything costs 5% less, you can pay your workers 5% less and they're just as well off as they were originally. So that's going to reduce the costs, and when costs get lower, firms produce more. And when they produce more, SRES shifts out. So in the long run, prices fall further, and then GDP and unemployment go back to their original levels. So the recession used to the cost of recent deficit is temporary. Eventually get back to equilibrium. So as you can see, expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy are appropriate at different times. So sometimes you want to use expansionary fiscal policy to fight a recession, and then when you've recovered and you're worried about your deficit, then you use contractionary fiscal policy. So this combination is known as counter-cyclical fiscal policy. So as it's called counter-cyclical, it goes back to the business cycle we talked about way back in chapter 6. So we had this diagram, so we had time over here, and then we had the log of real GDP. Long run, the trend is upward due to things like technological progress, stuff like that, and growth. But you had these ups and downs that were around that long-run trend. Now, if you use counter-cyclical fiscal policy, you're trying to counter the business cycles, trying to stabilize these fluctuations. So if you do that, then the fluctuations, well, they're probably still going to be there. They could be less severe. So maybe something more like this. So one metaphor I like to use is when it's cold, use the heater, and then when it's warm, you turn on the air conditioning. So you're trying to counter the cycle of temperature. So you're trying to stabilize the temperature. You can try to do the same thing with the economy by using expansion and contractionary fiscal policy at appropriate moments. Now, in practice, though, we're pretty good about using expansionary fiscal policy during recessions, but we don't actually see a whole lot of contractionary fiscal policy. Trying to reduce spending or increase taxes seems to be politically unpopular. So we don't really see many examples of implementing this fully in the real world. So that is contractionary fiscal policy. So in our next episode, we'll look at multipliers. So sometimes spending $1 on expansionary fiscal policy can give you more than $1 of stimulus, but we'll learn about that later.